My pranams to all Atma Jyotis, divine light of the self. I welcome all of you for today's session of Tripura Rahasya. So, continuing the discussion of Tripura Rahasya, we heard that heard the conversation between Hemangada and the Brahmin, a Brahma Rakshasa who transformed himself to a Brahmin. So Hemangada explained the principle of Ishvara Tattva or Sadashiva Tattva. One supreme reality who is beyond all sense organs and mind, who is of the nature of pure awareness, manifests as Sadashiva, the Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara, and multiple universes, and enters into each universe as Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara, the billions and billions of universes, billions and billions of millions and millions of Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara, billions of living beings. All that is there is Jagannatha, Tripura only. Even though she takes all the forms, she is not at all affected. It is like saying water takes the form of wave, ocean, foam, bubble, but nothing happens to water. She manifests as the entire creation, all living beings, including you and me. We are also an appearance of Tripura, the transcendental reality. So Sadashiva, she takes the form of Sadashiva or Ishvara Tattva, principle of Ishvara, who is the collection. All living beings have ego. Each is an individual. Each living being thinks as an individual. Sadashiva Tattva is the collection of all egos of the totality. So there is a shloka in Purusha Sukta, Sahasra Shirsha Purusha Sahasraksha Sahasrapat Sa Bhumim Vishwato Vratva Atyatishta Dashangulam Purushe Vedagam Sarvam Yadbhutam Echabhavyam. So the Purusha or the consciousness is all that is there. Sahasra Shirsha, he has 1,000 heads. 1,000 heads includes your head, my head, all living beings' head, ant, elephant. All these are nothing but the heads of one consciousness, Purusha. Sahasraksha sees through all the eyes of all living beings. The consciousness alone sees through all the eyes of all living beings. In spite of that, Tripura does not undergo any change. Water appears as a wave, ocean, bubble, foam, vapor. Nothing happens to water. So Tripura, Jagannatha, is unchained. It's another way of saying you are sleeping. In your sleep, you appeared as a forest, tiger, elephant, river, but nothing happened to you when who is sleeping. You alone appeared as all those. Like that, Tripura or Jagannatha, all that is there, but nothing is, she is not affected. So now, how does the Sadashiva Tattva, Sadashiva operate? You eat, you say, I eat. That means you identify through body and eat. When you say, I see, you identify this I sense organs and say, I see. Sadashiva, being all-pervading reality or Ishvara, he experiences the world through Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara. So how do you do that? So with the tongue, you taste the food. I taste the food. There is a sense of I which tastes the food through tongue. There is a sense of seeing. I see through the eyes. There is a sense of seeing through eyes. What happened to eye? The eye does not change. Similarly, Sadashiva being a collection of all the egos, The entire world is experienced by Sadashiva through all the body-mind complexes, including Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara, down to a small ant or an elephant. Ishwaraha sarva bhutanam hradi arjuna tishtati. Ishwara is there in heart of all living beings to experience the world. Samam sarveshu bhuteshu tishtantam parameshwaram. The Parameshwara is there equally in all living beings. It's not the ant has more, elephant has more, ant has less. No, equally. The entire Sadashiva consciousness experiences the world through your body-mind complex, through ant's body-mind complex, through elephant's body-mind complex, without itself undergoing any change. Even though the entire universe is differentiated, there's a cosmos, there's stars, planets, galaxies, the living beings, non-living beings. Tripura or Jagannatha is not differentiated. She is one alone. She is akhanda. She is unchained. Water appears as a wave, bubble or foam, but water is unchained. Water is one alone, one reality. Like that, Tripura is unchanging reality. In your dream, you appeared as a differentiated forest, river, tiger, elephant, and a human being. But nothing has happened to you. You are not the person who is sleeping, whose consciousness is differentiated, but the person who is sleeping, nothing, there is no differences in him. Like that, there is no differences in differentiation in Tripura or Jagannatha. The entire cosmos, the entire universe from macrocosm to microcosm is like a reflection in a mirror. She is the mirror and reflection happens in her. Reflection is not real. Reflection appears and disappears, but nothing happens to the mirror. So here reflection analogy is given to explain it's more like imagination. Entire universe is nothing but imagination in Jagannatha, Tripura Devi, Tripura Sundari. So the reflection can change. Nothing can happen to the mirror. Reflection cannot exist without the mirror. The mirror is pure, even if the reflection is impure. Similarly, entire world of creation, there is impurity, purity, fight, suffering, joy, happiness. That does not affect the pure consciousness, Tripura, the Jagannatha. The mirror is dirty or mirror is polished. It does not make a difference. The image is dirty in the mirror or clean. It does not make a difference. So for the consciousness, pure awareness, Tripura Devi, Jagannatha, the presence and absence of the image, presence and absence of the world, appearance and disappearance of the world does not matter. So now we start thinking Tripura Devi is somebody else. She is your innermost self. She is the Atma. She is none other than the self, Atma. When you say, I am coming, I am going, I am eating, I am drinking, you are always referring to an unchanging I. I am stands for existence, consciousness. Am stands for existence. Existence and consciousness is the I am is existence and consciousness. It's pointing to a pure existence and pure consciousness, which is the self, which is Tripura, which is your own innermost self. So you can recognize her, Tripura Devi as your self, Atma. She is the sum total of the bliss of all. All living beings struggle for happiness. Anything I do, I try to get some happiness. Everything in life is driven by happiness. I want to get happiness. I want to avoid suffering. So this is the drive. The happiness of living beings has different levels. All happiness of all living beings in the universe, starting from amoeba all the way up to the Brahmaji. If you put them together, that is not even a drop in the ocean of bliss of Tripura Devi. Add all happiness of all living beings together. That happiness is like a drop in the ocean of happiness of Tripura Devi, who is none other than yourself, Brahman. So to get that bliss of the self, people do all kinds of spiritual practices. They are ready to experience any hardship. People drop the family, they go to Himalayas, they stay in the caves, they stay in the ice cold, they stay in the snowy region of Himalayas, they stand and meditate, they don't eat, take food. Lot of different types of spiritual practices, hardships people face to get a glimpse of the bliss of the Divine Mother, who is yourself. For the bliss of the self, people do all spiritual practices. That means they are ready to tolerate any amount of pain to get that ultimate bliss, which is infinite bliss. Hoping that I will attain that bliss of the self-realization. Now the question may come, if you are saying the bliss of the self is my own self, is Tripura is my own self, why I am suffering? Why I don't have that bliss all the time? I should experience if she is myself, if she is the innermost self of mine, if she is my Atma, if Tripura is my Atma, if Sri Vidya is my Atma self, I should experience all the time. Why I am not experiencing? Our mind is constantly looking outwards, searching for happiness. In that search for happiness, the mind is going out. And when the mind is agitated, there's a suffering. Mind seeking happiness outside is a suffering. So when you get something, momentarily you'll feel happy. And again, the suffering starts because you start seeking something else. What you don't recognize, what mind cannot recognize, is the constant seeking of happiness in the objective world is suffering. This suffering masks the bliss of the self. The thoughts, the objects cover. The mirror is shining, but a lot of cluttering of the thoughts and objects or reflection in the mirror you may not even recognize that there is a mirror, because of so much of images are there. Similarly, the presence of the consciousness or awareness is not recognized when a lot of thoughts and feelings and emotions rush in us. Why that thoughts and feelings and emotions? Because you are seeking happiness from the objects of the world. Even then, you get a glimpses of happiness, a glimpses of self. When do you get that? You are seeking something, maybe a jalebi. So mind gets agitated. When you eat jalebi, momentarily mind becomes silent. And then again, mind starts agitation. So when that mind becomes silent momentarily, the bliss of the self is reflected in the mind. And that's exactly what you call as happiness. Every time you become happy because of your friends or relatives or because of eating something or enjoying something, it is a bliss of the self which is getting reflected in the mind. Because mind has become silent for that duration. There's no happiness in any objects, but mind is not able to recognize that happiness coming from within. It starts seeking happiness from the objects. So the mind becomes silent. At that time, happiness of the self is reflected in the mind. So the mind thinks that happiness came from the outer world. So it again starts agitation. So how do you experience that bliss of the self all the time? The objects of the world, what you call as world, is nothing but thoughts. Thoughts in the gross form is called world. Objects in the world, objects of the world in subtle form is called thought. Thoughts are things in the world. So for that thought, there is a thinker. Thinker is another thought. For thinking, intelligence is required. And that intelligence, pure intelligence, comes from inner self, Tripura, pure awareness. So when you drop all the thoughts, the mind becomes silent. So there's no individuality left. Then the pure awareness is there, which is of the nature of bliss. The pure awareness alone is bliss, Ananda. Your essential nature is Sat, Chit, Ananda, existence, consciousness, bliss. You get a glimpse of that bliss. You understand that bliss in deep sleep. In deep sleep, there are no thoughts, there are no objects, there's no mind, there's no body, but you are blissful. Why you are blissful? The bliss cannot come from objects. It cannot come from anything else. Then who is there? Self alone is there. Bliss. That's why sleep is experience of non-dual bliss. There's no other. All living beings seek sleep because of this reason only. They want their own nature. Seeking happiness in the objects of the world is again seeking yourself. Actually, seeking the self in the objects is the problem. You are seeking happiness from the world because happiness is your nature. Somewhere you are not able to, not comfortable with unhappiness because unhappiness is not your nature. Suffering is not your nature. So you want to get that happiness. And for getting that happiness, your mind goes outwards. So in other words, mind is seeking the self only in the form of happiness, but it does not know how to look for it, how to seek that. So the solution is drop the mind, drop the thoughts. In that thoughtless state, pure awareness, bliss is there. Self is of the nature of dense bliss. It's full of bliss. unhappiness appears and disappears. But background is always the bliss of the self. Bliss of the self is like a screen on which the movie appears. The space, infinite space, we cannot perceive. Infinite state, we cannot perceive the infinite space. The eyes cannot see it in, or the mind cannot perceive the infinite space. Why? The space is emptiness of anything. Emptiness cannot be perceived by mind. Space only can be perceived with respect to object. Between two objects, I see a gap. That gap I call a space. The mind cannot perceive nothingness. The space is nothingness. The space is recognized in the presence of objects. Similarly, the pure consciousness or pure awareness is nothingness, not an object. A drop of that is manifest in the presence of objects. The bliss of the pure consciousness is manifest in the presence of objects. A drop of that. So people may ask the question, is self of the nature of happiness or self seeks happiness? I seek happiness. Is self is seeking happiness? Is Atma seeking happiness? Or Atma is of the nature of happiness? Am I the self seeking happiness? No, the self is of the nature of happiness. How do you know that? When there is a suffering, somebody is carrying a load, heavy load. He is suffering and suffering causes unhappiness. He keeps the load. Immediately he feels relieved. The load was momentary suffering, but when the load is relieved, there is pleasant sensation, happiness. So what was the background? Background was happiness. There was no object there. When the object came into picture, the load he carried, there is a suffering. So unconditional happiness is your nature. That you can recognize in deep sleep also. There is no positive object for happiness in deep sleep. In deep sleep, there are no objects, but still you are happy. So that only shows your nature is happiness. Do you exist in deep sleep? Yes, I exist. Are you conscious in deep sleep? You are conscious. Because the happiness experienced in deep sleep. That's why when you wake up, you say, I have slept happily. It's a positive experience of happiness is there. But in that positive experience, there are no objects. So that's why happiness didn't come from any object. Happiness was the nature of the self which was experienced in deep sleep. That happiness is non-dual. That happiness is called Ananda, Ananta. Why it's called Ananta or infinite? Was there a limitation of body? No. Or there's a limitation of mind? No. So that means spatial limitation, time limitation is gone in sleep. And you experience your infinite nature and bliss, Ananda. It's a very positive experience. Otherwise, you will not go to sleep at all. It's a very positive experience of bliss of self because self alone is there. There's no object there. So now the question is, do you exist? Did you exist in this sleep? Yes, I existed because I only said I went to sleep and I woke up. So the I or the pure awareness existed. Are you conscious? I must have been consciousness, because otherwise, how do I experience? How do I say I had a blissful sleep? So that experience of happiness is there. That means you are conscious. There was happiness. That means you are Ananda. So I existed is called Sat. I am aware is called Chit. I am blissful is called Ananda. Deep sleep exposes your nature as blissful self. Where there is non-duality. So that gives a clue to us how to experience the bliss of the self. There should not be objects, thoughts, feelings, emotions. Free from thoughts, feeling, and emotions, I experience the bliss of the self. Can that be done? It can be done. It can be experienced. That's what samadhi is. In the waking state, being free from thoughts, feelings, emotions, you abide in yourself, and that's called samadhi. Then another question comes. So then should I be in samadhi all the time? Because I want to be blissful all the time. So that is possible when the samadhi becomes sahaja samadhi or natural state. When the ignorance is dropped, ignorance that I am the body, I am the mind, I am the intellect, association of self with the body, mind, and intellect drops. The self associated with the non-self drops. Then you are in samadhi, in waking state, dream state, or deep sleep state. That's called sahaja samadhi. Otherwise, the bliss of the self is experienced by everybody all the times in a day. Thoughts keep rising because their vasanas are there. Vasanas will become thoughts, thoughts will become action, action will become result. Then again another thought rises. In between these two thoughts, in between two vasanas rising, there's a gap. In that gap, bliss is there. But we don't recognize because that's very short, small. Immediately another thought will rise. Self is not affected by the world. Self is not at all affected by the world. Now, what is the relationship between the self and the world? What is the relationship of pure awareness with the world? The relationship is like a pot to the mud. So the mud only appears as pot. Mud only appears as pot. Pot is just a name and form of the mud. So if you ask, is there a pot or a mud? If you ignore the name and form, you are only say it's only mud only is there. Similarly, the world is self. All objects of the world are nothing but self. The body is self. Self alone exists. The existence, pure existence is self. The self is related to the world, like the gold is related to ornaments. There's necklace, chain, ring, all those things are there. The necklace, chain, and ring don't have independent existence. So if you go to a jeweler and ask, give me necklace, he will weigh the necklace. What does he weigh? He weighs the gold. The weight of necklace is nothing but weight of gold. The gold alone is there, appearing as necklace. There's nothing called independent entity called necklace. Similarly, there's nothing called independent entity called world. The self alone is appearing as a world. Now, you may get a question. Oh, if self has appeared as a self, there is no variation. Self is, you said, there's akhanda, unchanging. Then how is there a variation in the world? The variation in the world is because the world is nothing but an image in the self. The world is reflected image in the self. Reflections do not change the nature of the mirror. Self alone is appearing as the world. The world is not real. The self does not undergo any changes. You can think it's almost like a imagination in the self. You can imagine that you are going in a forest, a tiger is being chasing you. You may feel afraid, but nothing is happening to you. Similarly, the world is nothing but an imagination in pure awareness. So then what is bliss? What is realization? What is self-realization? What is Atma? So there are two steps in that. To realize I am Brahman, I am pure awareness. Myself is Tripura. The innermost self is Tripura. That's called Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. I am awareness. I am pure consciousness. Then also to realize that all that I see, experience in the form of the world is nothing but awareness. Sarvam Kalayu Brahma. World is the self. So to recognize all in one and one in all is called liberation. Jivan Mukti. From that perspective, there's no bondage, there's no liberation. All appearances. The supreme reality, pure awareness, Turiya alone appears as waking state, dream state, deep sleep state. So she alone, Tripura alone appears as bondage and wisdom. There is none other than the pure awareness, the self. Self alone exists. So understand this reality. That is called Advaita, or non-dual self alone is the reality. With that understanding and clarity, if you live, you are called a Jivan Mukta. So Parshurama tells the Bhagavan Dattatreya tells the story of Hemangada and Brahmarakshasa to Parshurama. Now Bhagavan Dattatreya tells the phala of listening. What is the benefit of listening to this story? So one who listens to the story of Brahma Rakshasa and Hemangada, one who understands the teaching of the story, will be freed from all doubts. He will be purified. He'll be free from the mind. He will attain the bliss of the self, Atma Dnana, supreme reality. He will recognize self in all and all in self. One in all in one, and becomes Jivan Mukta. He is emancipated while he is alive. He attains the supreme goal of life, to recognize the self in all in self. So this is the phala or benefit of listening to the story of Brahmarakshasa telling Brahmarakshasa asking questions from Hemangada and getting answers. So this completes the chapter 21 of Tripura Rahasya. Now, there are some question and answers about earlier chapters. The summarization of earlier chapters is done in the form of question and answers. So those question and answers I'll take probably in next 2-3 days. We should be able to complete the entire Tripura Rahasya. So some the question and answers are interesting. They'll bring a lot of clarity in our understanding of the teaching of Tripura Rahasya. So those question and answers I'll take in the next 2-3 days classes. By probably Thursday or Friday, we'll be completing the Tripura Rahasya. Okay. So anybody has any questions? Any questions?
Guruji.
Okay. So things are clear?
Yeah, clear. Very clear.
So Brahma Rakshasa ran away?
Yeah, ran away. He taught us and ran away.
So Vani, Srinivas Murthy, any questions?
No questions, Prabhuji.
Okay. So tomorrow,
Self can only be, you know that you are the self when there are no objects. That was very revealing to me.
right. But then after objects come also, you'll know that you are the objects are nothing but self. First you recognize yourself, then you recognize everything as a self only.
Neti admel iti iti. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Okay. So anybody else?
ಏನು ಕ್ವಶನ್ಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲ ಗುರು, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ನೀವೆಲ್ಲ ಕ್ವಶನ್ಸ್ಗೆಲ್ಲ ಬ್ರಹ್ಮ ರಾಕ್ಷಸನ್ಗೆ ಆನ್ಸರ್ ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀರಲ್ಲ, ಅದನ್ನ ನೋಟ್ ಡೌನ್